I like it because I know one thing for certain is that if you do get married, you must commit yourself to that.
At 83, Cliff Richard revealed the love of his life, and fans are emotional over it. Known for his iconic music, Cliff has always kept his heart a mystery. Now he's opening up like never before, showing his vulnerable side. Decades of fame couldn't hide the deep love he's carried all along. His story reminds us that even legends have personal dreams and heartbreaks. Fans are touched by this rare glimpse into his life. Let's dive into Cliff's journey, challenges, and the love that defined him. The confession. At 83, most people are winding down, reminiscing quietly in the comfort of familiar places. But not Cliff Richard. Instead, the man who's been in the spotlight for over 6 decades dropped an emotional bombshell that sent shockwaves across generations of fans. She was the love of my life, and she never knew. He was talking about Olivia Newton-John. Those words, spoken gently, yet with unmistakable sorrow, landed like a gut punch. Cliff wasn't promoting an album, reminiscing about chart toppers, or announcing a comeback tour. This wasn't about fame or fanfare. It was a moment of raw honesty, stripped of celebrity polish. In an emotional tribute following Olivia's passing in 2022, Cliff allowed the public a glimpse into the part of his life he had kept quietly guarded for decades: his heart. Fans around the world were visibly shaken. Social media lit up with tributes not just for Olivia, but for Cliff too. People wrote things like, "How tragic that he never told her," and "This is the saddest love story I've ever heard." Others shared their own tales of missed opportunities and unspoken feelings. Somehow, the stoic, ageless icon who had once sung Bachelor Boy had become the symbol of silent love and deep regret. For those who knew their history, Cliff and Olivia had always seemed unusually close. They sang duets, they laughed through interviews, they shared a spiritual connection and leaned on each other through personal storms. But few could have guessed just how deep that connection ran. Cliff revealed that during the time Olivia was engaged, he realized his own feelings, but said nothing. "It just wouldn't have been right," he admitted, "but I lost the chance. She never knew how I really felt." That kind of honesty, especially from someone as famously private as Cliff Richard, was more than unexpected. It was heartbreaking, and it painted a very different picture of the man many thought they already knew. Sir Cliff has always been something of an enigma, a pop legend with squeaky clean charm, a spiritual soul who never married, and a celebrity who somehow dodged the scandal-ridden lifestyle of his peers. He seemed untouchable until now. This moment revealed a vulnerability that was deeply human. It peeled back the carefully composed exterior and showed us someone who, like all of us, has wrestled with timing, love, and loss. And maybe that's what hit fans so hard. Here was a man who had everything: fame, fortune, endless applause, but who had also missed something irreplaceable. In a world where we're told to seize the moment and tell people how you feel before it's too late, Cliff's revelation felt like a cautionary tale dressed in real-life emotion. But how did he get to this point? This mix of pride, regret, and wisdom. What shaped Cliff Richard into the man who could dominate music charts for over 60 years and still carry such emotional weight behind the scenes? To answer that, we need to rewind. Because before the glitter, the screaming fans, and the stadium tours, Cliff Richard was a young man with big dreams and even bigger challenges. So, who was Cliff Richard before the fame? And what personal struggles carved such quiet resilience into one of Britain's most beloved stars? Let's take it back to the beginning. Cliff and Olivia's beautiful what if. When Cliff Richard first met Olivia Newton-John, it wasn't love at first sight, not in the romantic sense anyway. It was something else. A spark, a mutual ease, the kind of instant comfort that's rare, especially in the entertainment world where egos often walk in before people do. They were both stars, but their friendship had a surprisingly down-to-earth rhythm. They sang together, toured together, and laughed together. In public, Cliff would gush about her voice, her sweetness, her inner light. Olivia would return the warmth, always calling him one of the kindest men she'd ever known. And for decades, that's where most people thought it ended. But now, we know better. Behind that charming, sibling-like camaraderie was a deeper current. As Cliff recently revealed, he had fallen for her, deeply, irrevocably, but he never told her. The reason? Timing. By the time he understood what she truly meant to him, Olivia was already engaged. And Cliff, ever the gentleman, wouldn't allow himself to interfere. "It just wouldn't have been right," he said softly. But she never knew. I never told her. It's the kind of heartbreak that doesn't make headlines until years later. And by then, the ending has already been written. Cliff and Olivia's relationship was more than just professional chemistry. It was magnetic. Fans could feel it when they performed their 1980 duet, Suddenly, a song so tender it practically whispered the love story they never had. There was no acting in that performance. It felt real, because perhaps it was, just not in the way people imagined. They also shared a strong spiritual connection. Both found peace and grounding in faith, something that often drew them closer behind the scenes. Olivia's battle with breast cancer was one Cliff stood beside her through, offering prayer and support, even while she bravely faced the world with a smile. Over the years, their bond grew into something that defied traditional labels. Was it friendship? Was it love? Was it both? To Cliff, it was simple in its complexity. She was the love of his life, and he didn't realize it until it was too late. That revelation, shared so late in life, adds a layer of bittersweet poetry to their story. It's a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful connections aren't always loud or obvious. Sometimes they're quiet, gentle, missed, but the question still lingers. Why didn't he tell her? Why didn't he take the risk? Cliff's answer is heartbreakingly honest. He didn't want to cause pain, to disrupt her happiness, to complicate a life that was already beautifully full. His silence was a sacrifice, whether noble or tragic, or both. It shaped him, and in a way it shaped how we see him now, not just as a pop icon, but as a deeply sensitive man with a story most of us never knew. Their story, equal parts beautiful and sorrowful, remains one of pop music's most touching what-ifs. And it left Cliff with a quiet kind of grief, the kind you don't shout about, but carry gently for the rest of your life. But love wasn't the only thing Cliff kept hidden from the world. His life, though filled with fame and fortune, was also marked by painful trials, deep personal losses, and one public scandal that nearly broke him. So how did Cliff Richard survive the storms behind the spotlight? And what did those darkest moments reveal about the man behind the music? Weathering the storms behind the spotlight. For someone who spent his entire career wrapped in a clean-cut image, one of faith, humility, and pop perfection, Cliff Richard's darkest chapter was almost too surreal to believe. In 2014, everything changed. Without warning, police raided Cliff's Berkshire home in connection with historical sexual abuse allegations. The story made headlines instantly, not just in the tabloids, but broadcast live on the BBC. Cameras swarmed the scene like it was a movie set. The only problem? Cliff wasn't even home. Worse, he hadn't been charged, or even questioned yet. For someone who had spent a lifetime avoiding controversy, it was a complete nightmare. Cliff later described the moment as like being falsely accused of killing. He was blindsided, humiliated, and dragged into a scandal that, despite the lack of charges, left deep emotional scars. It felt like I had been publicly hung, drawn, and quartered, he later wrote in his autobiography. For 2 years, the cloud hung over him. He went from being Britain's forever golden boy to the subject of whispers and judgment. With no proof, no trial, and no apology from those who spread it. Eventually, the Crown Prosecution Service dropped the case due to insufficient evidence. Cliff was never charged, but by then, the damage was done. His reputation had taken a hit, and more importantly, his faith in justice had been shaken. He later won a privacy lawsuit against the BBC for broadcasting the raid, a small victory in what had been one of the most traumatic events of his life. And yet, through it all, he remained standing. That's not to say he wasn't hurting. Privately, Cliff also faced a series of personal losses that chipped away at him. His beloved sister Donna passed away in 2021, followed by his niece Lindsay. These weren't distant relatives. They were family Cliff had leaned on for years. He spoke openly about the heartbreak, but also about the importance of gratitude, even in loss. "I cried every day," he said, "but I thanked God that I had them at all." That kind of perspective isn't something you fake. It comes from years of being tested and years of relying on faith when everything else feels uncertain. It's easy to see celebrities as invincible. They have fame, fans, wealth, and adoration. But behind the scenes, Cliff's life was filled with trials that would break most people. What kept him going? In his own words, it was God, music, and purpose. He turned to prayer during the darkest days. He kept singing when it hurt to smile. And somehow, he kept his dignity. Even after being cleared of all allegations, Cliff admitted he never felt quite the same. "You can clear your name legally, but emotionally, it's never fully erased," he shared in a later interview. The trauma reshaped how he viewed trust, fame, and even the media. He became more cautious, more protective of the quiet life he had built outside of the spotlight. But despite all the storms, Cliff never crumbled. And that's part of what makes his story so compelling. He didn't just survive, he endured with grace. He proved that strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing back up when you've been knocked down in front of the world. Yet for all his resilience, there's still one mystery that has followed him throughout his life. Why didn't Cliff Richard ever marry? In an industry obsessed with romance and drama, Cliff stayed uniquely solo. Was it a choice, a sacrifice, or simply part of a deeper truth he's only now beginning to share? Let's take a closer look at Cliff's lifelong decision to remain single and the stories behind the loves that never lasted. Why he never married. The loves that almost were. For decades, it was the question no interviewer could resist asking. "Cliff, why have you never married?" It was asked with curiosity, sometimes suspicion, and often with a wink, because for someone who sang so sweetly about love, Cliff Richard lived a surprisingly solo life. No wife, no children, no high-profile romances that ever led to a walk down the aisle. For someone as famous, attractive, and adored as Cliff, it always felt like there had to be more to the story. And there was. Let's rewind to 1961. Cliff was young, famous, and just beginning his takeover of the British music scene. Back then, he was dating Delia Wicks, a dancer. By all accounts, she was lovely, and they made a picture-perfect couple. But as his star rose, Cliff made a difficult and, in his own words, ruthless decision. He ended things with Delia in a letter that heartbreakingly explained he couldn't balance love and the demands of fame. He wrote, "Being in show business, I have to give all my time to it, and that doesn't leave time for the kind of marriage and family life I think you deserve." Delia later admitted she was devastated, and while Cliff would go on to date again, the pattern was already set. Career first, love second, if at all. Over the years, there were other romantic sparks. He was linked to actress Una Stubbs, model Jackie Irving, and perhaps most famously, tennis star Sue Barker in the early 80s. With Sue, things got serious. Serious enough that Cliff considered proposing. He even bought the ring, but in the end, he didn't go through with it. His reason? I liked her very much, but I just didn't love her enough to give up everything. That everything, of course, was his career, his independence, and arguably his spiritual commitments. Cliff had converted to Christianity in the mid-60s and made it clear that faith was at the center of his life. And for him, marriage wasn't just a romantic gesture. It was sacred. If he was going to commit, it had to be forever. No half-hearted promises, no rush-out decisions. He once told an interviewer, "It's better to have loved and lost than to marry and mess it up." And that philosophy stuck. The fear of entering a marriage that would crumble, or one that didn't align with his faith or purpose, was enough to keep him from ever taking that step. Then there were the fans. The bachelor boy image wasn't just a cute pop single. It became a brand. Cliff was marketed as the ultimate clean-cut heartthrob, approachable, dreamy, and very much available. A marriage might have crushed the fantasies of millions of fans and, more cynically, impacted record sales. Still, even now, Cliff doesn't look back with regret. "People think I must be lonely," he once said, "but I'm not. I've had a wonderful life, filled with love, even if it didn't come in the form of marriage." But of course, fans have long speculated. There were whispers about his sexuality, persistent rumors about longtime companions, and curious eyebrows raised over the years. And Cliff? He never got defensive, just quietly defiant. In a rare moment of candor, he once responded, "If I was gay, would it make any difference? Would you love me less?" It was a powerful moment, not just for him, but for his fans. He wasn't going to explain what didn't need explaining. He chose privacy over public approval, peace over gossip. Still, it's fair to wonder, in a world that loves to label, how did Cliff navigate decades of scrutiny? A life under the spotlight, but never fully exposed. In the world of celebrity, mystery doesn't last long. The press has a way of pulling back curtains, digging through closets, and trying to answer the questions everyone whispers. And when it came to Cliff Richard, the whispers never quite stopped. Despite his fame, or maybe because of it, Cliff has always been something of an enigma. He didn't drink, he didn't party, he didn't sleep his way through the tabloids like so many of his rock and roll peers. And, most notably, he never married. For many, that last detail was the spark that lit 1,000 rumors. Is he gay? Is he a secret priest? Does he have someone, but just won't say? Cliff never seemed rattled by the questions, but he also never truly answered them. He walked a careful line, open about his faith, his friendships, and even his fears, but resolutely private about his personal life. One longtime companion who often fueled public curiosity was John McAlin, a former Catholic priest turned property manager. John lived with Cliff in his homes in Portugal and Barbados for years. They traveled together, worked together, and appeared at events side by side. Naturally, tongues wagged. Cliff addressed it once. In his autobiography, he called John his companion and said their friendship had brought him tremendous joy. That was it. No labels, no declarations, just honest emotion shared on his terms. To some, that wasn't enough, but Cliff made it clear. If I was gay, would it matter? It was a rare moment of pushback from someone known for grace, but it was also one of his most human. He wasn't ashamed. He simply didn't owe anyone an explanation. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful answer of all. Throughout the years, media headlines tried to shape him into something more digestible. They called him the Peter Pan of pop, the bachelor boy, and occasionally less flattering things when scandals broke or questions went unanswered. But Cliff never played into the noise. Instead, he stayed focused on the work. He let the music speak louder than the rumors. And in doing so, he cultivated something rare. A career not built on drama, but on integrity. That's not to say the speculation didn't sting. In interviews, Cliff has admitted to feeling hurt by assumptions, and occasionally frustrated by how persistent some of the stories were. But rather than lash out, he leaned harder into the things that gave him peace: his faith, his music, and the tight-knit circle of friends and family who knew the real man behind the public persona. He's often said, "I've never pretended to be something I'm not." And that may be the simplest summary of how he's handled a lifetime in the spotlight. Even now, in his 80s, Cliff manages to hold on to his privacy in a world that constantly demands more. He posts updates to fans, releases music, and reflects on life with grace, but he still keeps certain doors closed. And honestly, that's part of the reason his fans love him. He's always been his own man. But behind all that control, there's another story, a professional one that runs parallel to the personal. Cliff Richard's unbelievable, nearly unmatched career. Chart toppers, sold-out shows, movie star moments, and musical reinvention for over 6 decades. Through it all, one thing is clear: the world never stopped listening. So how exactly did Cliff Richard go from a hopeful teenager with a guitar to one of Britain's biggest music legends? The boy who never left the stage. Before the heartbreak, before the headlines, and long before the unspoken love stories, there was just a teenager named Harry Webb, a shy boy from India living in post-war England with a dream and a second-hand guitar. That boy would soon become Cliff Richard, and not just any star, but Britain's answer to Elvis Presley. It all started in 1958 with the explosive single Move It. Raw, energetic, and totally different from the soft ballads dominating the UK airwaves, the song blasted onto the charts and introduced a new era. British rock and roll had arrived. John Lennon himself once said that Move It was the first real rock song to come out of England. Not a bad endorsement. Cliff wasn't just a flash in the pan. He was the spark that ignited a generation. By the 60s, Cliff was everywhere. He was churning out hits like Living Doll, The Young Ones, and Bachelor Boy. He wasn't just a singer, he was a cultural phenomenon. Girls screamed, boys copied his hairstyle, and parents actually approved of him. He had a unique charm, rebellious enough to be cool, but clean-cut enough to stay on the telly. He also found success on the silver screen. His films, like Summer Holiday and The Young Ones, were box office smashes. He sang, he danced, he grinned his way through Technicolor musical numbers, and the public couldn't get enough. But while the Beatles and Stones leaned into rebellion, Cliff leaned into something else: longevity. He refused to disappear with the trends. Instead, he evolved. The 70s saw him take on more adult themes with songs like Miss You Nights and the hauntingly beautiful Devil Woman, one of his biggest US hits. Then came the 80s and 90s, with synth-driven tracks and pop ballads like Wired for Sound and Some People. He even hit Christmas #1 more than once, something of a British national sport. By the time he was knighted in 1995, Cliff Richard had done the impossible. He remained relevant across 6 decades. From vinyl to cassette, CD to digital, he just kept going. And the numbers? They're jaw-dropping. Over 250 million records sold, more than 130 singles, with 14 #1 hits in the UK alone. He's the only artist to have a top 5 hit in every decade, from the 50s to the 2010s. That's not just staying power, that's musical immortality. But Cliff's influence wasn't just about sales, it was about what he represented. At a time when rock music was often equated with rebellion and recklessness, Cliff brought discipline, warmth, and spiritual conviction. He proved you didn't have to live fast and burn out to be a rock star. You could do it with a smile, a suit, and a sense of purpose. Even after retirement talk began swirling in his later years, Cliff wasn't done. He continued to tour, to record, and to connect with fans. Whether it was an anniversary show or a Christmas release, people showed up and sang along. His 2020 album, Music, The Air That I Breathe, cracked the top 5 on the UK charts. At 80, he was still making hits. Unbelievable, but true. And through it all, through shifting musical landscapes, tabloid storms, and personal heartbreak, Cliff never lost his core. He remained faithful to himself, his fans, and his music. In an industry known for reinvention, Cliff didn't reinvent. He refined, he endured, he mattered. But what kept him going through all these years? What allowed him to bounce back from heartbreak and scandal, to keep singing when the world had changed completely? Faith, resilience, and personal values, the heart that kept singing. For many stars, fame is fleeting. For others, the weight of public life becomes unbearable. But for Cliff Richard, something far more enduring than charts and applause gave him strength. Faith. Cliff's journey with Christianity began in the mid-60s, a time when the world around him was changing fast. The rock and roll lifestyle, parties, wild crowds, and fast living never truly appealed to him. Instead, he sought something more stable, more meaningful. He found that in his relationship with God. In 1966, Cliff became a devout Christian, and this decision shaped much of his personal and professional life thereafter. He openly credited his faith for helping him navigate the dizzying highs of stardom and the devastating lows that followed, including his 2014 legal ordeal and the losses of close family members. He once said, "Faith gave me a framework to understand the chaos. It wasn't always easy, but it kept me grounded." His music also reflected this inner journey. Songs like Peace in the Valley and The Millennium Prayer weren't just crowd pleasers, they were testimonies. His faith wasn't something he kept hidden. It was woven into his identity, though never forced onto others. Resilience became another defining trait. Cliff had faced public scrutiny, false allegations, heartbreak, and loss. Yet he never let these break his spirit. Instead, he leaned on the values that mattered most: humility, kindness, and forgiveness. In interviews, he repeatedly emphasized the importance of compassion, both for others and for himself. "I'm not perfect," he admitted once, "but I try to be honest and to live with integrity." This resilience was visible in how he handled his scandal, too. When police raided his home and the allegations were broadcast on live TV, most would have crumbled. Cliff fought back, not just legally but emotionally. He used the experience to raise awareness about the dangers of rushing to judgment in the media and the toll it takes on individuals. Behind the scenes, he surrounded himself with loyal friends and family, people who knew his true character and helped him keep perspective. That support system, combined with his faith and his music, created a powerful shield. Cliff Richard's life reminds us that true strength isn't about never facing hardship. It's about how you respond when it comes. He didn't just survive, he kept moving forward, with a humility rare for someone of his stature. He continued to give concerts, release albums, and inspire new generations of fans, not because he had to, but because it was his calling. As he once reflected, "The love I've received from fans has been a blessing, and it's what kept me going during the darkest days." Now, at 83, with decades of music and life behind him, Cliff Richard's story isn't just about fame or love lost. It's about faith, resilience, and the quiet courage to live true to yourself. No matter the noise around you, What's next for a man who's already lived a lifetime on and off the stage? Legacy and reflections. The enduring voice of a generation. After more than 6 decades in the spotlight, Cliff Richard isn't just a singer. He's an institution. His legacy stretches far beyond record sales and chart-topping hits. It's about the impact he's had on British music, culture, and the lives of millions. From the very start, Cliff broke new ground. He was the first British rock and roll star to rival the dominance of American artists. That paved the way for the British invasion of the 60s, inspiring bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones to chase global fame. His wholesome image, combined with genuine talent and showmanship, created a blueprint for generations of performers who sought to balance commercial success with personal integrity. But perhaps the most remarkable part of Cliff's legacy is how relatable he remains. Despite his superstar status, he has always projected an everyman's humility. Fans across the world, young and old, see in him a reminder that it's possible to live a full life, face adversity with grace, and keep one's values intact. Even at 83, Cliff continues to inspire. Whether it's through new music, live performances, or his candid reflections on life, he shows that passion and purpose don't have an expiration date. In recent interviews, Cliff has expressed gratitude for the journey he's been on. "I've had an extraordinary life," he said. "The love, the music, the faith, it's all been a gift." And while the love of his life, whoever she may have been, remains a tender mystery, Cliff has shown that love itself wears many forms. Love for music, love for fans, love for God, and love for life's simple moments. His story teaches us that sometimes the greatest love isn't a person, but a purpose that keeps your heart beating and your voice singing, no matter what. So, as we reflect on Cliff Richard at 83, through triumphs, trials, and tears, we see not just a star, but a man who dared to be himself in a world that constantly tried to rewrite his story. Perhaps that is the greatest song he's ever sung. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel for more.